Okay, kids, we're live. Dan, I see
Hello.
you have your Buffalo Bills gear on. Is that right?
I most certainly do.
Go Bills. What a great game on Sunday.
How
It
about
sure was. It
how about
sure
those
was.
New York teams?
Dude, 3 weekends in a row, all the New York teams have won.
Yeah.
Yes,
yeah,
I think it's great.
It's amazing. Anyway, folks, welcome to the Saratoga podcast. We are actually not a sports podcast, despite our beginning conversation. We're just apparently all avid football fans. But we've got a great show today. We have Dave Catalfamo and Assemblywoman Carrie Woerner coming on shortly. Dave Catalfamo is running for state assembly against incumbent Carrie Woerner, and we are really looking forward to talking to them both. So they will be on shortly. And then in the meantime, we had a monster city council meeting last night, did we not?
It was interesting.
It was a longie.
It was a long one. It was a long one, and it was pertaining to the aggressive panhandling bill. Not all of it, obviously, but in the beginning there was a public forum on it, and a lot of people came out to speak on it.
So question, when are they going to, because they've been having, I think, a couple of public hearings on that. When are they going to vote on it?
You know, they made a point of saying that they weren't voting last night. They never said when they were going to vote. It's kind of fits into the modus operandi of the city council is they'll have an issue, they'll tease it, and then slip it in and vote on it. They do so, within all the regulations. So it's not like they're, doing anything illegal or immoral, but they'll kind of test the waters first and then decide, when they want to strike or make their move. But
it's possible they could never vote on it. They could never reintroduce it.
Yeah, if they're actually listening to the public comment and taking in what people are saying, perhaps that will affect the way they feel about the piece of proposed legislation that Jim wants to vote on, and maybe he will pull it. What I think is kind of unfair, though, is that all these people are taking time away from their lives, showing up at City Hall, going to public comment, which is not necessarily an easy thing for a lot of people to do. And then they're looking for some resolve, like what's going to happen. And week after week, we just lost Dan. Dan.
Well,
my point was week after week, they're coming back. And I just think like at some point they need to know when it's going to be voted on, as opposed to asking them to keep coming back and back for more public hearings.
Yeah. Well, the interesting part, and I think, Ryan, this is something that you and I will disagree on about this aggressive panhandling bill. But the one thing, the public comment, the people who did show up, especially the people who came against it, it was the same group of activists that it's almost like their identity to show up for City Hall and be outraged. And I understand the concept of, all right, these are people, they just need homes. This is a simple solution. But for me, this aggressive panhandling bill, what it does is it doesn't deny people the right to, the homeless people. It doesn't deny them the access to help or aid. What it does, I think, is kind of pushes them in the direction of people who can start to help them get off the streets and become more productive.
But how does it do that? By fining them?
Well, I think by discouraging, you're absolutely right. The fine is not going to help that, but it will discourage them and prevent them from making a living, sitting in the cycle. And I would think it's a cycle of panhandling and using those proceeds to buy. Listen, there's
support an unhealthy lifestyle is what you're saying.
Exactly right. There's always the exception to the rule, but if people, it's not like this is the only avenue for help for people.
But I guess right?
You're not going to have a mother and child who their only way to feed themselves is to sit on a street corner and panhandle. There are plenty of organizations in Saratoga that can help them and help them in a more, or in a beneficial way, a more constructive way than sitting on the street and begging for money. You messing with it again?
Sorry. My thing is that at the end of the day, like, what's aggressive, right? How do you find aggressive in terms of panhandling? Because you are legally allowed to panhandle. Like, that's a legal right. That's a
constitutionally, it's not even legally, it's constitutionally protected.
Constitutionally protected. Thank you. And so, right. I think we have Dan almost back. God, having some tech issues today. Dan, if you can hear me, it says your
I know, Robin. I love the fact that when we disagree, that you have to juggle all the things, so your mind's a little.
Yes, sorry,
you got to get Dan
here.
You got to juggle our guests, and I can just sit here and be comfortable and make my points. But
thank you for pointing that out, Adam. Yes, I am the person who does all the quote unquote producing. So if I ever look distracted during a show, it's just because I'm waiting for guests or the banner. Do we have an echo?
No.
Yeah. Hey, Dan, I think we're getting a little feedback from you there, buddy.
Yeah, we are.
Oh man, I'm having a bad day here. I'm blaming StreamYard for all this. It's not my computer.
Yeah.
Are we good?
Not really.
Much else for you here?
Oh, all right. Yeah, that's a little better.
I think we're good.
We're waiting on Dave to log on. Let's see.
Dan, Rob and I are discussing the aggressive panhandling. Now, this homelessness issue and panhandling issue has been an issue in the city that's been, it's been bubbling, it's been seeping, it's coming to a boil, right? What are your thoughts on this aggressive panhandling? Do you think there should be a bill preventing it? Do you think there's other ways to help to combat the homelessness?
Well, all this grief, if you will, all this time and energy, some of this is already addressed in the New York State penal law. So what they're talking about is merely mirroring language that's already in the law. I've said it before, this is giving a lot of energy to
guys, I'm going to interrupt us real quick because we got Dave on and Mr. Catalfamo is here. So I'm going to add him to our stream and then we'll come back to this issue. Okay.
Sure.
Great.
Hello, Dave.
Hello, Robin. How are you?
How are you?
Good. Sorry for the delay. I was having technical difficulties on the set.
I think we were all having technical difficulties today. So not to worry. We're just thrilled to have you. So welcome to the Saratoga podcast.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me. Terrific.
No, thank you. So I just wanted to jump right in and ask you to tell folks a little bit about your background and why you are running for office.
Okay, so my background is I'm an economic developer actually by trade. I worked on a lot of economic development projects throughout the state over the last 30 years, including Global Foundries, ran the I Love New York campaign. I currently do economic development in Oneida County, where we have actually just landed another fab here. It's actually called Wolfspeed. They make silicon carbide chips that actually power electric vehicles. Been very involved in a lot of sports, tourism-related development, including here. We just opened up, or we will be opening up in November, what's called the Nexus Center, which is going to be 4 sheets of ice connected for sport tournament play, which you know anything about in sport tournament, it is a huge industry right now. And I mean, anyone with kids, they drive them around all over the place so that they can compete for it. So a whole lot of money being spent in there. So jobs is my professional passion. But I kind of got into this race because my other passion is, quite frankly, safety. I totally believe that, in order to have good communities, great communities like we do, you got to have safety. And what I saw 2 years ago and what I've seen since is an erosion of that safety through policies that have, I believe, led us down a path that we need to address. I ran 2 years ago for the assembly, came up short. And honestly, if they had fixed the criminal justice system, I probably wouldn't have ran again. Because that's what really kind of keeps me up at night. Along the way, a lot of other stuff has gone wrong. There's been a lot wrong with Albany for a while, but obviously inflation is kicking people's tails right now. I don't care who you are. It's affecting you. And that gets exacerbated by the fact that we live in the highest tax state in America, bar none. No one even talks about that anymore, but we do. And that hurts more, right? When you're paying crazy inflation numbers, that those taxes actually mean more. So we need to take steps on that too.
So can we go back to the public safety issue real quick? So Are you specifically talking about bail reform? Can you be a little more specific about the policies that you would like to change?
Yeah, so like 2 years ago, we were talking primarily about bail, but I mean, since then, it's become a whole range of issues, right? It's been raise the age, it's bail, it's the HALT Act. There's others, and Robin, it's not just the laws itself; it's also sort of what comes with that, which is an attitude and a permissiveness about not taking responsibility. And
Yeah.
and I know we live in a great community, a safe community. The 113th is safe by comparison to other states, but we don't live in a bubble. I mean,
Right.
we see what's going on in Albany, Troy, Schenectady, and places like that. And the notion that anyone thinks that is going to stay away from our borders is misguided. And beyond that, your job as an assembly person is to represent the district, but it also is to have a voice in the state. And I'll be honest, it both offends me a little bit, well, a lot, but it hurts at my core to think about sort of the notion that people are so cavalier with people's safety. I mean, lives get ruined.
It does seem like we've lost some of the kind of just basic social contracts of how we, just behave in terms of like people just like walking into stores and shoplifting, or the way we're treating kind of like petty crimes almost, and then in conjunction with some of the policies that have come down, I certainly think there's been a shift in the wrong direction in terms of public safety. And I have one more follow up, and then I know these guys have a lot of questions. Sure. So we know Albany is pretty much dominated by the Democratic Party. And so how, as a Republican, do you plan on working with Democrats to change some of these policies?
Yeah. So, I mean, let's start with, I think that these policies would be changed right now, but for the fact that there's one person who doesn't want to change them. He is the Speaker of the Assembly, Carl Hastie. He's the chief architect of these policies. And frankly, he is the top supporter of my opponent, who 2 years ago spent over $850,000 to win this seat. The reality is you have, I can start to list them off. Mayor Eric Adams, who's a Democrat in New York City, who's been calling for a special session. David Soares, who's the district attorney in Albany, who I am absolutely positive I have zero in common with on a political philosophy point of view. But even he said to the governor, or called on the governor, how high does the body count need to go? How high did the body count need to go before we take action? Bob Duffy, the lieutenant governor under Andrew Cuomo, called for a special session. People like Jerry Nadler and Carolyn Maloney, the only people in the state that are Democrats that are holding out on these issues is Carl Hastie and the folks who are under him in the assembly. And I know you're going to have my opponent on later, and she's going to tell you about how she's going to sound just like me, except where she only sounds like me during the election year. And she only gets active about it during the election year, and gets passionate about it during an election year. And that is a difference. So far as working with people, I do think that making a couple changes like this will send a very clear message to the speaker that his position is not sustainable anymore politically. And we'll start there. But look, I'll work with Republicans, Democrats, socialists, communists, you name them. Anyone who will make this state safer, our community safer, I'll work with them. And share ideas and try to move the ball forward.
We're hoping you don't run into too many communists and socialists in Albany, but
you might.
Exactly.
Dan and Adam, I know you guys have some questions.
Adam, I'll defer to you first.
All right. Well, my first question was I think you already answered, was what was your biggest issue, as a Republican, coming into a blue state, but it sounds like, crime and safety is your biggest issue.
It is, Adam, because I feel like it is government's number one responsibility. And anyone who tells you that they could fix inflation by themselves that would be crazy, right? But the state does control who's in jail, who's not in jail, what the terms of those conditions are. That the state controls that. We control that at the state level, and therefore that is something that could be most impacted.
Yeah. All right. Well, like I said, I'll lead to my next question is I'm a big proponent of states' rights, was the federal rights. And one of the, the big things that happen right now is the overturning of Roe versus Wade, which for me kind of kicked that can to the states, for the states to decide what they think their people is just and legal. And I just wonder what your thoughts are on, a woman's reproductive rights and what you would advocate for, what you would support.
Okay. So it's interesting, right? I would say, and my wife and I talk about this, like that I was of the camp, and I think it was in the majority of the camp, that I didn't think that it was possible that the court would overturn Roe v. Wade. So I think when people say that, simply say, well, don't worry about it because everything is okay in New York.
Right.
I think that underestimates sort of the experience of what people just had, right? Which is a lot of women looked at a right that they've enjoyed for the past 50 years, I guess, and they saw that rate diminished. Even if we all know that rate has not been diminished in New York.
Yeah.
That happened. So let me start with, I understand that. I support, with respect to it, as far as I'm concerned, it's between a woman and her doctor. And that's my position on it. I don't support late-term abortion. That's not a thing that I support. And by the way, and I don't want to go down the rabbit hole of this, but typically, my wife and I just had a baby, and she late term had I can't remember the condition when you get high blood pressure,
Preeclampsia.
Preeclampsia. They would never recommend an abortion if they would deliver the baby. I mean, the notion that late term abortion is a medical procedure is actually 99, very, very, very rare.
Well, yeah, it's rare, but I mean, there are obviously situations in which a mother's life is at risk.
Which I totally agree with. You know what I mean?
Right.
Yeah.
So, but I think that my opponent holds that out as something that is much more common, and I think, and as a difference between us, which, and anyway, she's free to do that. But so far as the state goes, I mean, you probably have heard our candidate Zeldin has said that he had no intention of doing anything to change the laws, and I certainly would, continue to support women's ability to have access and to be able to make that decision with their doctor.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Dan, do you have any questions for Dave?
I've been trying to meet up with Dave since June. We've been missing each other so many times, Dave.
If you want to go door to door with me, I'll have plenty of time. We could talk in between.
Hey, listen, let me ask you, as you know, I spent a lot of time in the state capitol, on the lobbying side of things. And I have tremendous respect for you. And I think a lot of people do, as well as your positions and so forth. And I guess the but is Republican assemblymen in the state capitol, and with almost very few exceptions, have no juice.
Mm-hmm.
How do you say to someone, yeah, I'm going to have juice? You say you'll reach across the aisle, but you point out Carl Hasty is a big problem.
Yep.
So how would you overcome that on issues? The crime issue, obviously I'm with you, but issues like VLT money for Saratoga Springs. This is a Democrat state. Yep. How can you bridge that gap of making sure Saratoga gets its fair due and VLT money and things like that when you're in such a minority?
I got 4 answers for you. So let's start with, number one, Saratoga has not been getting its due. I mean, the notion that it's been getting its due is
agreed.
Last time it got its due, Joe Bruno was in office. So
agreed.
Let's dismiss the notion that anybody has been delivering for Saratoga in a way that, because basically what they did was when Global Foundries got done, they checked the box and said, we're done. And they walked away. And they held the VLT money there. By the way, they hold the VLT money, as you know, in other places too. It's not just a singular community issue. So they're Democrats that represent those areas. So Saratoga is not getting its fair share. When it comes to sort of effectiveness in Albany, which is really what you're talking about, my opponent says you need me there so that I have a seat at the table. I'm not quite sure what having a seat at the table is delivering for us vis-a-vis, the farm labor bill. Has a seat at the table, didn't affect anything, waited till after the thing got signed on to have a press conference to stamp your feet about it. Concealed carry law, literally the most ridiculous, unconstitutional law that I've seen. They didn't even care about the law, Dan. You know that. They passed it and they basically said, as a political act, and knew that it was going to go to a court and get thrown out. I can tell you, I have never seen a more powerless group of people in my life than when I saw 300 people up in Washington County basically get told about how this law is going to work. And people explain to them, it's completely unconstitutional, but the state doesn't care about your rights. They want to treat you like a criminal, even though as a concealed carry person or a hunter or a sportsman, you're the furthest thing away from it. on issue after issue, my opponent said, you need me on a seat at the table, but on the big things that matter, I don't see it making a difference because she plays inside that system, because she needs the support of Carl Hastie to be able to continue to hold this seat. So while I'm not going to say that she doesn't work or that she doesn't, deliver some things sometimes, I don't think that we see a change in policy in any way, shape, or form that actually is impactful to this area. In fact, supports things that, look, think about the climate change bill that they passed, where you're not going to have any more natural gas hookups in 2035. You and I will no longer be able to barbecue outside. Barbecue grills, seriously, go on. The ability to literally, we will face winter blackouts because of a policy that essentially stretches the grid. And my opponent will tell you this too, if she's being honest, that stretches the grid so that we can send renewable energy that we produce in all upstate New York down to the city. The policies are literally nutty.
Okay, but Dave, you never answered though. How could you, as a Republican Assemblyman and a distinct minority, effectively change?
In 5 minutes on this podcast, I said more about what's wrong with these policies than my opponent does. My opponent knows that they're this way. It's because I'm not afraid to speak out and find out what's wrong and to try to find coalitions of other people who will agree with me. Look, you can't change things if you're so co-opted by the system that you're unwilling to do it. And here's the other thing about it. And it's not just my opponent. There's also Republicans who are like this and other Democrats. Institutional Albany is so afraid of bad stuff happening that they sign on to just barely lesser bad stuff. That's the way it goes there now. So you got these crazy climate bills that are out there that literally will, swear to God, will have us living in winter blackouts. So they sign on to like Carrie's clean fuel bill. Okay. Sounds good in concept, right? Except for the 3 states that have this clean fuel bill are in California, Oregon, and Washington. Every state that has this is paying $2 or more per average for gas. No one can even explain to you how it works. I understand a little bit how it works. It creates an energy market credit and it gets fed in and you can do this. It's good for farmers and all that. Honestly, people sign on to it because it's way better than the worst thing that's being proposed in Albany. And that's literally what's going on right now. You have groups like the Business Council and whatever. They endorse this stuff because they're so afraid that the worst thing is going to happen. I'm not sure how much worse it could get. We have 350,000 people leave the state. We're paying the highest taxes in America, bar none. $220 billion budget. And one more thing about that, we have got the lowest. Our education outcomes are between 40 and 50. Our healthcare outcomes are between 40 and 50. And there is no end in sight to the spiral of spending, taxes, and poor performance that we see at Albany. Zero. There is zero end in sight unless we do something to change the culture down there. It is broken.
So can I bring it back to some local stuff real quick, if that's all right with you?
Yeah.
I know that I'm looking at one of your mailers right here, and it says preserve and promote racing in the arts, support our downtown shops and restaurants, and kind of piggybacking off of that, job creation. Job creation is a huge issue in upstate New York in general. And for me personally, I'd like to live in a community where when my kids graduate from college, they have job options for them here locally, and they can move back here and have a career. How would you stimulate job growth and the upstate economy if in office?
Well, so I think that there's local initiatives, and then there's obviously big kind of broad sweeping stuff.
Right.
The big kind of broad sweeping stuff is workers' comp costs are killing our business, regulations are killing our businesses. Mandates like the farm overtime law are hurting our businesses, hurting our farmers, going to drive small farmers out of business. Everyone knows it. It's not just hurting our dairy and produce farmers. It's actually, I met with, horse guys, right? Breeders who have farms who literally are impacted by it. So I think that there has to be a wholesale assault on those issues that affect costs for businesses, across the board. How do we reduce the mandates on them so that so they can basically manage to be in business in New York. Taxes are certainly part of the scenario. I mean, again, we pay super high taxes. So to the extent that we're able to lower the tax burden in different ways, that's going to make businesses more competitive. If they're more competitive, they grow. Right now, if you talk to business owners who are not captive to the area, they would tell you that you got to be nuts to try to start a business in New York.
It is brutal. It is brutal for small businesses. Yeah.
And that's in the big picture stuff, right? And I think it's not just one thing, and it's never just one thing. It's about affordability. It's about regulatory relief. It's about finding ways. It's not about taking their money and giving back to them. Like that's inefficient, and it's just bullshit politics. Excuse my French. I guess
that's okay. I curse on the show all the time, so don't worry about it.
Yeah.
And I apologize.
So regulation you see as a big problem for New York State businesses, regulation and taxes.
Yeah, and look, New York is never going to be the least expensive place to work and do business, and it doesn't need to be. Right. We don't need to be. When I was at Empire State Development, we didn't believe that we actually had to. We weren't like racing to be Alabama or Mississippi.
Yeah, let's not do that. Maybe.
We've got great like infrastructure, great schools, great education, great. We need to incrementally bring stuff that at least hold the line so people have some predictability. But the regulatory mandates are actually hurting people. That's the big picture. Small picture, one thing that I did talk about, Robin, was, I really believe that horse racing industry and horse racing in general can really be expanded and built upon here and really beyond sort of just the meet and the season.
Yeah.
And one of the things that's been very successful in Kentucky is the Kentucky Horse Park.
Yeah.
And building on sort of that regional tourism so that folks can not only just visit the track, but they can visit some of the therapeutic farms, some of the rehabilitation places, some of the breeding farms, and then you tie that in with local craft brewers and distillers and whatnot, and you create a tourism experience. And that is something that they have done. Kentucky had done very, very effectively. They have extended their horse racing to tourism throughout the year. We can do that, and one of the ways that they actually do that is through the Kentucky Horse Park, which is a place that you could go that is all things about horses. And I think that's something that would make sense as a public-private investment in our region.
Yeah, just to expand on that, the McMahon farm, which the horse funny side was dropped on. I knew one of the ladies there, and just walking around there, especially during February and March when the horses, that's the breeding period for the horses. It was a really special thing. That wasn't a public thing. That was just because I knew somebody. But that's a really interesting concept because you have these big, beautiful farms surrounding the city with these beautiful animals.
Yep.
Yeah.
Let me whisper this in your ear too. We have a mounted division in our police department here, a mounted unit. One of the things I talked about when I was in office with them that we had really hoped to do, but obviously COVID and whatnot derailed our attentions. We would love, the police department here would love to become a training center for other law enforcement agents who want to get certified to become mounted patrolmen. And, we have facilities around here, like, over at the Racino and whatnot, that we could partner with. And that to me would be like very exciting and kind of another dimension to how we attract people to Saratoga and what we're able to offer. We have to wrap.
I just want to see one more thing I just got to say. Oh, sorry, Dave.
No. Let me just finish, because I remember I told you there was 4 answers to that. Number 4 is that there's a very real possibility that Lee Zeldin is the next governor of the state of New York. And so then you can ask yourself in that, go back to Dan's question, how are you effective? Who would be more effective working with Lee Zeldin, whether that would be me or Carrie Woerner, number 1. Number 2, which is the fact that Lee Zeldin, in order to be most effective, needs to get rid of the supermajorities so that he can withstand vetoes, overrides. And me winning this seat and a few others in the state actually become very key to him being a successful governor as well. So if you support the policy that Lee does, which are going to be lower taxes, getting crime under control and all that, if your viewers do, then actually having an assembly that has, I think, 3 or 4 more members so that they don't just override all the stuff he does actually would matter. So, and of course, I have a relationship with Lee and know how to work government. So if Lee's the governor, I think feel very strongly about my ability to work with him to bring investment and state resources to the region as well.
Robin, a quick comment before we wind down. Dave, you know I'm a Carrie Woerner fan, but I'm also a Dave Catalfamo fan. And this was so well done. Congratulations to you and whoever designed this. I've never seen a political flyer, especially me as a Republican, and I'm looking at it and saying, wow, this is so balanced and moderate and not shouting at me, positive. So
I hope I wasn't shouting at the podcast.
I think they're trying to rebrand Republicans in Saratoga, which is interesting. You brought up Lee Zeldin. This is my last question for you.
Yeah.
How do you handle being in a party that does have a fairly large faction of election deniers when we're talking about the 2020 election?
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm me. I don't. When people, it's probably come up a couple times at doors. When I was asked, Joe Biden, the president, he won the election. So it's pretty simple. My view is I'll work with folks, and so far as what their views are, people have a lot of different views that I don't necessarily agree with.
Well, it would be great if you brought back moderate Republicans, because I think we've lost that moderate faction. So,
everybody hates Robin. I'll tell you, everybody hates that term moderate when you're talking about.
Trust me, I know.
I feel so, and I don't know that I do or I don't, but I'll tell you this, and maybe it comes through. I'm so passionate about the law and order stuff. I going door to door. I met a corrections officer from Green Meadow, and he told me basically almost got killed in the yard, because they can't control the prisoners there because they can't manage them in space anymore because of the HALT Act. And then he goes from there to the cells where he's having human waste thrown at him. And honestly, and I'm not exaggerating. I left the conversation with him, and I was moved. I mean, this guy was broken.
Yeah, there's a lot of emotion.
There's
a lot of emotion tied up in.
And this is somebody that we're who's charged with keeping us safe. And Dan, you must know it. I mean, just our officers who are on patrol, who are keeping us safe every now, they feel abandoned, and the laws, they're not protecting us, they're not protecting them, and we got to fix it. It's just too important. We have to fix it.
Dave, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. We really appreciate it. Thank you for your time. Best of luck. And unless Dan or Adam, you have anything else to say?
Dave, Bills, Giants, or Jets?
There's only one answer. I'm just kidding.
Cowboys.
Good. No votes for you.
On that note, we're wrapping. We're done.
Thank you. It's fun. Thanks so much.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
All right, guys. We're gonna hop right into bringing Assemblywoman Woerner on. One sec here. Assemblywoman Woerner, how are you?
I'm good, thanks. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today. We really appreciate it. We know you're quite a busy lady, so we appreciate your time.
Oh, I'm happy to do it. Delighted to be here.
So can you tell us, we asked the same question, Dave. Tell us a little bit about your background. We know you've been in office for some time, and why you want to continue to be in politics and represent our district in the state assembly.
I'd be delighted to. Again, thank you for inviting me and including me in your podcast. I'm a fan, so I am looking forward to being part of the conversation. So I am completing my fourth term in the state assembly. That comes after what I did before that. I spent 30 years in the high tech industry, mostly in software and services. And I also I was a village trustee in the village of Round Lake, where I live, for 6 years, and I was also on the Malta Planning Board. So I have some local government experience. And in the context of that local government experience, one of the things I realized was that our local communities needed a partner in Albany that would be able to work with them on the things that they needed. Simple things like residency requirements require waiver legislation, and more complex things that communities need, like the VLT monies that Saratoga gets, and that then Governor Cuomo loved to try and take away. So I realized that there was, we needed a partner in government. We needed somebody that was committed to doing the work and making things happen. And so that's why I ran for office, and really that's why I continue to want to stay in this role. Is that is that I do think that our communities need a partner in Albany that they can rely on to really dig in and do the work. And that's what I've done over the last 8 years and what I'll continue to do.
So I have to say, of all the politicians I've ever known, I would say you are the most successful in terms of your bipartisan approach. You have tremendous support from Democrats and Republicans, and I think that's a pretty impressive thing, especially in this climate. Can you talk about your kind of approach to working with all sides?
Yeah, I start from the perspective that good ideas don't come with a party identification, and that in no other facet of our lives do we let party identification even become a topic of conversation. So if you are on the board of directors of a not-for-profit organization, or you are establishing a business relationship, or you're coaching Little League baseball, nobody asks, what party are you with? It's let's sit down, we have a common goal. Let's sit down, roll up our sleeves. Let's all contribute out of our individual expertise and backgrounds and come up with the solutions to whatever the problems are that we're trying to come up with. So I start from that perspective, and then it's about being just being out in the community and being visible and available. People tell me that I'm a lot like Bobby DeAndrea, that if two people are opening an envelope, I'm there with them, and that plays a key role, because when I'm sitting down with people at a pancake breakfast, or we're at a soccer game, or we're having coffee in a coffee shop, I'm getting to know them and what they need and what their challenges are at a level that is deeper than just seeing it on social media or hearing it on the news. And so when you really start to understand where people are coming from, and you do it with an open mind, it gives you a perspective that says, I know who the stakeholders are in this community and in this with respect to this problem, and I have relationships that I can draw on to get input and expertise, and that means that what I end up with is are common sense solutions to problems that resonate with people, so that when I bring them to the floor of the assembly to get the bills passed, it's not anything that anybody disagrees with. And one example of that is with respect to broadband expansion. The state put a ton of money into the broadband expansion program, and it didn't go anywhere near as far as it was touted to go. And so when I dug into that, I started to talk to the companies that are providing broadband, and I said, what's going on here? Why is the money not going far enough? And they talked about the poll make ready process, which is an esoteric aspect of utilities that we don't necessarily need to go into. But I started to understand what the regulations were and what the process was and what was going on and why it was adding time and cost to these broadband projects. And I put forward a bill to fix this. It ended up on the debate list that there were members of the minority that didn't agree with it, and they wanted to debate it. So we debated for a full hour, debated this bill. And at the end, it passed with unanimous support.
Wow.
And that was because it was a common sense. It was a problem that we all share. And we all understand that we want broadband expansion, and we want the money to go as far as possible. And we all understand that government can get in the way here. And I was bringing forward a solution. Nobody had realized that what was causing the problem. And once they understood what was causing the problem and how the solution was designed to fix that, it was a no-brainer, and everybody supported it.
Can you elaborate when you say broadband expansion in layman's terms for those of us who aren't in Albany? What was broadband expansion mean?
So in rural communities, there are a lot of people who don't have access to the internet. They can't get online, and this became, it's been a problem for a long time. But in the course of the pandemic, when we were all dependent on Zoom or other forms of video communication to do work, to go to school, to get access to medical care, it became a real problem. And about 2 years two or 3 years prior to that, the governor had put in place a $250 million fund to provide incentives to broadband companies to run the wires to every house and to deliver broadband. But after spending that $250 million, they were only maybe, 25 to 30% of the way there. They hadn't, there were still communities that were unconnected. So when you talk to the companies about, hey, I don't understand this. There are wires and poles that bring electricity and wired telephone to every single house, unless you opt out of being on the grid.
Right.
Everybody's got electric power. Everybody's got telephone power. Why is it that we can't run the wires on these poles to get the broadband to every house? I mean, the infrastructure exists to connect. Why can't we? Well, it turns out that that there are some rules. The power companies own the poles. There's some rules about who can connect to the poles and the costs that they have to bear to connect to the poles that get in the way.
So I'm going to do a quick left turn here, if you don't mind, guys. Your opponent was just on and said that he probably wouldn't be running right now if some of the public safety policies coming out of Albany had been addressed. Can you speak to that in general?
Certainly.
Yeah.
So, I objected to the bail laws when they were first adopted. I objected to them when they were proposed and tried to get changes before they were voted on, and that didn't happen. So I voted against it. And then for the next 2 years, I talked about it. I worked with our law enforcement. I worked with judges. I worked with our district attorneys to understand where I'm not an attorney, so I needed a crash course in the penal law to understand how the law was written and where the where the substantive changes needed to be made to fix it. So we made a first set of changes in 2020, and then that was a step in the right direction, but it didn't go far enough. So we went back again, and it took another 2 years of developing proposals, of working on building support for this. And we had more support in the legislature in 2020, going into 2022, to fix some of these problems. And we again made a big step forward. There are still things that need to be done. And I think about it as what we did was we had a system that had some fundamental unfairness, and lots of people across the spectrum will say there was some fundamental unfairness in the way the old bail system worked. But we swung the pendulum far to the other side. And what we need to do is bring it back to the center and get to a system that's fair and functional. So we're bringing that pendulum down the arc, and we're getting there to where it's fair and functional. So there's changes that still need to be made. There's no question about that. I met with our district attorney from Washington County. He's also the head of the District Attorneys Association last week. This week, I met with David Soares and Tony Jordan, with a couple of my other colleagues from the Capital Region. And we're building our list of here are the things specifically that need to change now, and we'll go after it. So it's an incremental process, and it'd be great if you could wave a magic wand and just undo something that had been passed, but it doesn't work that way. And I live in the real world, and I understand how it works, and it works by bringing back incremental changes. And we've made 2 increments, and we've got more to go. I will be the first to say that, but I'm committed to working on making those incremental changes, and I keep pushing. So.
Robin, I'd like to jump in, but I don't want to.
No, go ahead.
Oh, Asami, first of all, how are you?
Great. Thanks. How are you?
Good. Did you get to see David Catalfamo in his earlier interview? Were you on then? Were you in the back room able to see it?
I was in the back room, but just for the very end.
Okay. Early on in the interview, I asked him, I go back with him. I've got a fondness for him, but I said, how can you as a Republican Assemblyman get anything done in Albany? And he sort of turned it around at you and said, well, the district, and especially Saratoga Springs, hasn't gotten its due. and hasn't been happened since Joe Bruno. And she says she has to have a seat at the table. Well, she has a seat at the table, but she hasn't really been effective. Sum and substance is what he said, not his exact words. How would you already did respond to that a little bit indirectly, but how would you directly respond to his accusation that you've not been effective?
So we just passed the Green Chips Act this past spring, which was the state's version of the CHIPS incentive to bring semiconductor manufacturing to New York State. And, the Assembly has a history of not really liking big corporate incentives like that and being opposed to them pretty much always. So for 3 years, I have brought leadership and staff members and other members of the Assembly to Global Foundries to do tours of the facility, to get into those bunny suits and walk out onto the manufacturing floor to see how it works. Because I knew that if I brought them to Malta to see this, to see how many people are working, to hear about the local people that are getting jobs because we're doing semiconductor manufacturing, that we could talk about the ancillary jobs that have grown up around the chip plant and what that has meant to the economics. If we could talk about the kids that are going through the Clean Tech P-Tech program at Hudson Valley and are then getting work with Global Foundries, that they would understand that this incentive is going to pay off in our upstate communities. And so when that bill came to the floor, it passed unanimously. Well, not quite unanimously, but mostly unanimously. And no one really nobody fought it. And that's because a lot of people had already been through the plant. They had seen it, and most importantly, leadership had been through it. And so, Carl put the bunny suit on. He knew what this was all about. That was his third visit to Global Foundries. So by working on educating and using what we have here as an example, we're able to get a really important economic development package done. And as a result of that package, Global Foundries is going to move forward with their expansion. And that's another 1,000 permanent jobs. It's another 3,000 construction jobs during the several years of construction. That's a strong economic development package for upstate New York and for our district specifically.
I will say, I just want to interject really quick, Dan, and just say that in my personal experience, when I was on our city council, when we needed money for the police department to enact some of the police reforms that had been done by our Executive 203 group, Assemblywoman Woerner was there and secured funds for us. And I know recently we needed funds for Caroline Street sidewalks by Caroline Street Elementary. And I know that Carrie is working with the city council to make that happen. And so I have to say, in my personal and professional experience here, Assemblywoman Woerner has always been incredibly responsive to our city's needs whenever we've approached her. So that's something I've always appreciated.
Let me ask you. You talked about the tax incentives for the big business, but Saratoga is really built and sustained by the small business. You walk down Broadway and we have a Gap, we have an Eddie Bauer, but besides that, there's all the restaurants are locally owned. The banks are local, the retail shops are local. I don't think there's much doubt that New York State has high regulations, high taxes. Would you agree with that statement? And if so, what would you do to help the Saratoga small businessman and woman, to kind of be successful and be a viable business?
Yeah. So you are absolutely right. Ours is a small business economy. Actually, most of Saratoga County is a small business economy because downtown Schuylerville, downtown South Glens Falls, these are small business economies. Mechanicville, it's all a small business economy. And so just one of the things that we learned in the pandemic is that people like outdoor dining, and that is, that's a way for in our community where we have small restaurants, for them to add capacity during our big tourist season and grow their business. And it sounds like, well, what's the big deal? You should just be able to set up some tables outside. Well, it's a big deal because the state liquor authority actually doesn't allow you to just simply add space outside. If you're going to serve liquor outside, your liquor license or up to that point, didn't cover it. So one of the things that I did to help the restaurants is get that rule relaxed so that they could set up outdoor dining, they could serve cocktails, beer and wine outside, and that helped them through the pandemic. And frankly, I'm sure you've been downtown. It was a great summer, and those outdoor dining pavilions were really popular. And I was just on Viola Street last week, and every table at Solevo was filled. It was, there was no space outdoors. If you wanted to eat, you had to eat inside. So it was like,
it's a good problem to have.
And I have to say, I'm endorsed by NFIB, which is the National Federation of Independent Businesses, because of the work that I've done on behalf of small businesses. And I was talking to one of the restaurant owners a couple weeks ago, and he said, Carrie, you'll always have my support because you're the only one who gave a damn about the restaurants during the pandemic. So it's something that I spend a lot of time on, and and I look for the ways that we can help them grow their businesses. And we've been fighting on getting the governor to and the legislature to pay down the UI debt so that it doesn't fall back on the small businesses. We were fighting for this throughout the last budget, and we'll keep fighting for it because it's something that it doesn't make any sense to tax the small businesses, particularly the ones that didn't, that never laid anybody off, that just powered through, that got the EIDL loans, that got the PPE loans, and never laid anybody off. To punish them by making them pay the UI is just unconscionable.
Can you tell people what the UI is for those who don't know?
Unemployment insurance.
Thank you.
Yeah, the surcharge on the unemployment insurance to recover from all of the unemployment that was paid out during the pandemic.
Gotcha. Boys, do you have any more questions? I know I do.
Keep going.
Keep going.
No, I mean, go ahead.
Okay, let's see. Well, actually, one of the things also your opponent has just said is that he thinks there's a good chance Lee Zeldin will be our next governor. Do you want to weigh in on that at all? Do you think that's a real probability?
The polls are all over the place. I have no idea. And frankly, there's really only one election I'm really worrying about, and that's the one that I'm running in.
Right. Can you talk about, I know this district is not just Saratoga Springs. You represent a real variety of constituents. Can you talk about how you balance representing the folks in Saratoga Springs versus the folks in Washington County who obviously have like different needs and different wants?
That's a really excellent observation, Robin, and that's one of the interesting parts about this district is that it is urban. We have small cities, we have suburbs, and we have rural communities. So you really see a cross section. So what are some of the things that connect them? Well, one thing that connects them is a local food supply. Our farmers markets are really popular. We have farmers markets throughout the entire region. And it is how many of our local producers, it's their primary means of selling. And so I think making sure that we continue to have a vibrant agriculture economy is really important. And that's something that I have spent a lot of time focused on. So, beginning with the ag tourism liability bill that I passed back in, I don't know what year that was, 2016 maybe, which was the first piece of tort reform that had been done in decades to change the liability laws associated with ag tourism, so more of our farms could add an ag tourism component to help them diversify their revenue stream. To providing funds to the Future Farmer of America program. That's the Ag in the Classroom program that many of our rural schools have. to upgrade their learning technology so they could learn about indoor growing for greens. They had welders, robotic welders to work on. They had reverse osmosis machines to learn how to do that for maple season. So focusing on, some bringing resources to bear, as well as legislation that expands their opportunities. And then most recently, the New York Textile Act. It's what we have seen is that New York used to be a textile state, and it's like 100 years ago.
Yeah.
But,
I went to school at RPI, so I remember that Troy was the collar city.
That's right. Troy was the collar city.
They made collars. I thought there was more to it, but nope, they made collars, shirt collars.
And
100 years ago.
100 years ago.
Yeah.
But I have seen over the last few years, as the Battenkill fiber mill has gotten established, and that's a place that processes fleece into spun wool, that as they've gotten established, it has increased the number of people who are growing, who are investing in sheep flocks or are growing their sheep flocks, because there's now a market for that product. And just to give you a sense of perspective, a pound of wool is $120.
Wow.
So there's no other agricultural commodity that has that kind of a revenue stream. Now that's the spun wool. So the spinner is going to take some percentage of that $120. But even if it was 50%, which it's not, at $60 a pound, that is still a better revenue stream than pretty much any other ag commodity.
Yeah.
So, but we need a supply chain. So we have a little bit of processing capacity in this state in order to grow this, but we don't have a lot. And so what we need to do is try to attract more of those kinds of supply chain businesses, because that will pull through from the farm. And then New York City owns the fashion industry. There's 900 fashion houses that make their home in New York. And consumers, what the trends in consumers say, is that they're all looking for sustainable fabrics.
Yeah.
So they're not interested in the manufactured fabrics. They're interested in sustainable wool. So we're well positioned. We just need to grow the supply chain. And the New York Textile Act is really designed to incorporate the textiles into our economic development laws and into our state procurement laws and into our ag and markets laws, so that we can grow this industry. Because I think that is a way that businesses across the district, from the weavers because there are production weavers in Saratoga and in Glens Falls and Queensbury and Scotticoke, and then there are designers. In fact, I don't know if you can see my jacket, but this is a jacket that was designed and produced by Christina Collins, who's in Saratoga Springs, from wool that was spun. It started out as a sheep on Crazy Legs Farm in Fort Edward. It was spun at the Battenkill Fiber Mill. It was woven at Lily Mart Studios in Queensbury and Glens Falls, and then turned into a jacket in Saratoga Springs.
Very cool.
Yeah, so that's an example of how I represent both, all the aspects of this.
Can I ask you a question? And I know you've been talking a while, but this is something I'm curious on, and more less of you being a candidate, more just being on the inside of Albany. As far as hemp and marijuana in New York State, if you could give us a quick, this is because I think the common, the average Joe or Jane doesn't really get what's going on right now and where New York State's headed. So can you just quickly touch on that, and then where you see it going from here?
Sure. So I'll just give you a little anecdote to sort of wind my way into this answer. When I first ran for office back in 2012, my very first house party was in Hartford, New York, which is kind of mid-state in mid-county in Washington County. And as we'd had a nice conversation, I didn't know any of these people. As they were leaving, one guy leans into me and he says, we have the best marijuana in Washington County, and you really need to make it legal. So that was my introduction. I think my eyes went, okay, who knew? So as I have, as I developed a better and deeper understanding of our district, I realized that was really true, that we have great growers in this region who were growing a crop illegally for the illegal market. And as I started to learn about this market, and in New York State, the illegal market is, a $3 to $4 billion market. So by legalizing marijuana, the sale of adult use cannabis, we're really tapping into a market opportunity. And for growers in Washington and Saratoga County, it allows them to move out of the illegal market and into a legal product market. And so we know there's a lot of demand, and we now have, I think we have between Washington and Saratoga County, I think we have eight growers who got the initial licenses, the provisional cannabis licenses, because they're also growing hemp. And I know at least 3 of them have harvested their first crop this week. So
do we have any idea when dispensaries are gonna?
They say by the end of the year.
Oh, really?
The first set of dispensary licenses will be.
And will those be medical or recreational or both?
Recreational.
Recreational. Okay.
Yeah.
Wait, there are medical ones already, actually.
There are medical ones already. Yes.
I've heard.
Yes.
I know we've had you on for a while, but I'd love to ask you one last question, which is, what is the piece of legislation you're most proud of since you've been in office, and what is your number one priority for a new term?
Okay, so legislation I'm most proud of. I love the Textile Act. I'm really excited about that because I think it's creating jobs. I think it's creating opportunities. I think it's bringing us back to our roots and building a supply chain. So I'm really excited about this as a foundational piece of legislation, and there'll be more after that to build on it. So I have to say I'm really excited about that. I'm proud about it. There's a couple of other ones, the broadband legislation, and I'm proud of that because, it digs into what was really going on. Most people think in Albany, let's just throw money at it and that's going to solve the problem. And I got to a point where I said, it's not about throwing money at it. We threw money at it and the money didn't go very far. So what's the problem? And I'm proud of that because I think that process is what I am known for, is that I'm the one that says, what is the problem? There's a quote that I love that says, for every complex problem out there, there's a simple solution that is just wrong. And I don't like the simple solutions. I go for I want to understand what's really happening and how do we fix it? How do we turn things around in a way that's meaningful and is actually going to work? And that's, so the broadband bill is one that I'm proud of for that reason. The other one I point to often is the air ambulance bill. So it turns out that New York was one of 2 states that did not allow air ambulances to carry blood and blood products and to start a transfusion en route. So, and we live on the southern border of the Adirondacks, and there's probably 1 or 2 times a year you'll hear about a significant crash in the Adirondacks or a significant accident, somebody who fell off a cliff and they need to be airlifted to a trauma center. Well, we know how long these things take, and it's not, it even by air, it's a good half hour, 45 minutes to get to Albany Med, which is the closest trauma hospital. Well, if you can't transfuse somebody, if that's what they need, you're not giving them the best quality care. Yeah. And I discovered this not because of an accident in the Adirondacks, but because of an accident on a farm, that there was a woman who was on a tractor plowing in her field, and the tractor rolled over, and she had she was pinned under the tractor, significant injuries. And it was only because the medical director for that ambulance company, that she came from the hospital that day with blood, that woman was able to be transfused before she was transported. And she did lose her arm, but she could have lost her life. And that, that just said to me, I don't know how it happened that we ended up being in the last 2 states, but that was not going to I was not going to be satisfied with that. So we got that changed, and so I would point to those 3 pieces of legislation as the ones that I'm proudest of. So what's next?
What's next?
What's next?
Aside from getting through November 8th.
So I've got a list of criminal justice reforms that we're going to push through. I've got some additional things related to textiles that I want to work on, and we've got some additional broadband things to get rid of as well. So there's a wacky requirement from the DOT that they provide us, that the broadband companies provide a survey every time they hang a wire on a pole, which makes no sense to me.
Yeah,
so,
this is the New York State regulation that it kills
exactly
small business here sometimes. So
exactly, and so I'm one of those people that stand them up and I'm going to knock them down. And I'll do it one at a time. But I'm going to look for the ones that I think are getting in the way of delivering critical services.
Well, we really appreciate your time, Assemblywoman. I think you are probably one of the hardest working politicians out there. I see you at events and I see you all over 24/7, 365. So I applaud you for the hard work you've done. And thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure, Robin. And guys, it's been great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Assemblywoman.
Well, guys, it was an extra long show today. We didn't even get into city council.
Yeah. Well, the city council was same old. Ooh. But I'm impressed with both candidates. I think we're really lucky to have those. The 2 of them. They're just, I think as we discussed before, we're all moderates on this show. I think they kind of take a lot of common sense approach to things. So
and it was really nice of them to give us so much time. I really appreciate that.
Yeah. Yeah, and Robin, you run for office. I have too. This time of year just sucks.
It sucks.
You've been going for months on full speed. Yeah. You could see the finish line. So it's really great for them to take that little time out and let our viewers know where they stand.
Agree. Boys, so we want to end on some cheers and jeers.
Sure.
We might have to do, by the way, another show this week about the city council. What do you think?
Yeah, but I don't know. The city council like the same old, Dylan or Commissioner Moran and Mayor going at it about a lawyer. And
just interchange them. We interchange the things each week.
All right, I'm running our cheer and jeer.
All right.
What do you got?
Adam, you want to go?
No.
Okay. I will go. I'm going to cheer the weather. No, just kidding, Rob. I'm going to get a little ahead of myself here, but I'm fired up about this because I'm going to go past Halloween, past Thanksgiving, and talk briefly Christmas. Partially, the reason I'm going so far ahead is because it's another sign that that we're past the worst of the pandemic and that we're back to a normal society. Coming in next month, the Canadian Pacific Holiday Train is going to come back to Saratoga, and I'm fired up. So there's a cheer for that. It's partially a cheer for normalcy, but also now that I have kids and they're getting older and they love trains and everything like that. And there's a lot of neat things happening with trains in the Adirondack region. Some trains coming back on once dormant lines.
Except if you want to get to like New York City in a reasonable amount of time.
Well, yeah, exactly. You got to go to Albany. It's that simple. You got to go to Rensselaer. But this train is coming Sunday, November 27th at the Amtrak station, where the new condo facilities or the community is going up. But anyway, it'll be in the evening at 7:20, a little later than I would like for 7:38 showtime, but that's the schedule. It'll be in Mechanicville a little bit earlier. That's online. You can search that. So that's one of my cheers. I really searched for a jeer this week. I said, come on, I'm a gadfly at heart. I got to have a jeer. And I really didn't have one. So my second cheer is again to the Buffalo Bills. We talked about it, and a teaser, a cheer coupled with a teaser, jeer and cheeser, a cheer and a teaser. I'm working on something right now for Saratoga Living Magazine. I can't tell you what it is, but it's something that ties the Saratoga Springs with Buffalo and the Buffalo Bills, and you'll just have to wait for their next issue, the holiday issue, to come out to find out what that is.
Sounds good. Adam, do you want to?
No, you go for it. I'm looking for mine.
Okay, I'm starting with my jeer for the week, which is I am literally so tired of the political text messages, the political emails, and the political mailers that are like bombarding my phone and my home. It is insane. Politicians, how many times are you going to send me breathless text messages saying like, we're coming up on a midnight deadline. I need you. Chip in this, chip in that. Like, it is just like out of control. And so I'm really looking forward to that being over. But that would be my jeer. I mean, like, my God, it never ends. The money asks never end. Yeah. So that would be my jeer. My cheer would just be, I guess, again, just for Carrie and Dave for coming on. I just really appreciate it. And I know we're working on some other candidates before November 8th. I also just wanted to quickly update people. We had talked about, I think, Commissioner Songvi coming on to talk about the budget. And she is going to come on to talk about the budget after the budget workshops are done. So we look forward to having her to go through the city budget before it is adopted by the council and get some of our questions answered. So that'll be great. But aside from that, that's pretty much all I've got. Remind people that you can catch this podcast live on multiple Facebook pages, Twitter, YouTube, etc. But you can also find us wherever you watch your favorite podcast. On Apple, Spotify, Google, Amazon, really anywhere. So subscribe and watch and share.
Yeah, I got nothing. My notes are a mess. So
Adam's got nothing.
I'm gonna cheer. I'm like Dan. I'm gonna cheer trains and I'm gonna cheer planes. There we go.
What about automobiles?
Yeah,
Nothing?
automobiles. They're in the neutral.
We also started a Facebook page after lots of viewer demand. We've started a Facebook page for the Saratoga podcast in particular. So if you want to follow us on Facebook, just go to Facebook and go to the Saratoga podcast and you'll find us right there.
Come on, did we really have viewer demand?
Because people they couldn't find it live. And so like we didn't have one established channel that was called the Saratoga podcast to watch live.
So if you want to see it live or afterwards, now you know where to go.
Yes.
Excellent.
All right, kids. Over and out.
Take care, Saratoga. Thanks for watching.